Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle, and it takes a village, right? This is a show where we get parenting advice from the experts and also talk to fellow moms about all of the issues that we face when it comes to parenting. And today we are talking teens and vaping. The CDC conducted a survey a few months ago, and they found 10% of high school students said that they used an e-cigarette within the last month. 5% of middle schoolers said the same thing. And even though those numbers were slightly lower than last year for high school kids, the use of e-cigs is dangerous on so many levels. So we are going to talk to a pulmonologist in a few minutes. But first, let me introduce my co-host for this topic, Danielle Wiggins. Danielle, so good to see you.
Good to see you as well, and good to be here with the Mom Squad.
I know, it's been a while since we talked to you. And when I reached out, because we were covering this topic, I asked you, is this something that you're talking about in your household? And you said you just had this conversation?
We did. I have a 13 and a soon-to-be 16-year-old, so the middle school and high school ages. And, you know, I was going to bed and we were talking about something else, particularly about bullying and how they feel about school. And then all of a sudden they started talking about drug use and people in their schools. And so that's me like, well, have you tried it? And they said no, but you know, it's still like looking at their stuff to see, and they're like, no, you know, I haven't done, but friends are, and that's what the cool kids do, or something like that. And they don't consider themselves popular or whatnot.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting to see how they discuss it, and then I watch the two of them talk about it.
So interesting. Danielle took the right step in first talking to your kids about that. And we're going to talk to Danielle about this whole thing in a little bit, but we got a chance to talk to Dr. Fariba Rezaee with the Cleveland Clinic about how e-cigarettes and vaping affects your child's health. So thank you so much for being here and talking about this, because some of the statistics I'm hearing about when it comes to vaping and teens, even kids, are frightening. Are we seeing more and more kids and teens vaping despite all these warnings?
Of course, of course. So talking a little bit about the vaping, what's the vaping? Vaping is basically inhaling an aerosol created by the electronic cigarettes. And electronic cigarettes or vaping are battery-operated device that heat a liquid and generate aerosol, which is basically the tiny particles mixed with the air that can be inhaled. So it was 2007 that the electronic cigarettes came to the market, and it came just like that. Okay, so it's a substitute for the regular smoking, and it's safer. Fast forward, it was 2014 that the teenagers were using it more than anything else. So it became so popular, and it was advertised to them that it's just a water pipe, or it's not, or water vapor, and it does not have it's not as bad as the regular smoking. So that's why it became more popular and more popular, to the point that there were more than 3 million teenagers were reported that they were smoking. So according to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, last year the smoking or the vaping, using the electronic cigarettes in high schoolers came down from 16% to 12%. However, the number is still shocking. In the other hand, the middle schoolers started to rise up. So around maybe 6.6 or 7% of the middle schooler reported that they were using electronic cigarettes, which is very, very concerning. These middle schoolers are somewhere around 11 or 12-year-old, and let alone even the high schoolers, their brain is developing. So basically, the short answer to your question is that yes, vaping is on the rise, and unfortunately, people don't know what's the consequences of vaping.
Right. One of the reasons, and I told you this before we started the interview, one of the reasons I wanted to focus on vaping in teens is because a friend of mine told me that in 7th grade, her child and their friends are using vaping as currency. Vapes are what they trade and what they're using as, you know, bartering with friends, which is frightening because that is really young. So I want to talk about the dangers because you took us through the history. we thought of e-cigarettes as, oh, it's not as bad as a full nicotine cigarette, but then we find out there still is nicotine in it, and it is addictive. And aerosol, I mean, for years we've been talking about how aerosol is harmful to our system. Now with vaping, people are inhaling an aerosol. So what does that do to the lungs and to the heart and our vital organs?
So the vape pens, even those that claim that does not have any smoker or any nicotine, they have nicotine. According to the CDC, the publication said that more than 99% of them have nicotine. So something to mention that the nicotine that is inside the vaping is really concentrated. So a pod can have around between like 2 to 4 of the pack of the cigarettes, even sometimes more.
Wow.
So each pack of the cigarettes has 20 cigarettes, and could you imagine if they use 1 or 2 pods a day, it seems that like they're using 10 packs of the cigarettes. And they don't know because they change the formulations and it does not bother them when they're using until they found out it's too late. So the symptoms or the danger is that one of them is the lung and the airways. They feel the sensation of the irritation, the airway, they start having coughing and wheezing and pneumonia and become more susceptible actually to the viral infection. Studies have shown that kids who use these electronic cigarettes actually are more susceptible to COVID and other viruses compared to those that are just using the regular or conventional cigarettes. So conventional cigarette is bad and the vaping is worse. And it's not just the lung. We know that the teenage brain is developing. And actually the teenage brain is developing up to age 25. And smoking or vaping, using the nicotine, can cause a lot of problem for them, can increase anxiety, that decrease their attention span. And even they have some depression. So there are a lot going on to that. And actually, nicotine is addictive. Nicotine, as soon as they inhale, it can go to the brain for a few seconds, and it becomes so addictive that it's so hard to get rid of that. So the other thing is that even the heart, every single organ in the body that you think it's bad for that. So like it's bad for the heart, it's bad for the gastrointestinal system, it's bad for everything else in the body.
And you think about if kids are starting this at 11 or 12, not just the brain, everything's still developing, right?
Yes.
I mean, does that cause growth issues then?
So scientists are still studying the long-term effect of smoking and using and vaping. However, when we use the mice model, as we've seen that it causes a lot of chronic disease, and it can cause cancer in mice. But we need to know more about the long-term effect of vaping.
When kids would, back in the day, when kids were just using cigarettes, I mean, a cigarette smell is very clear. You could probably tell if your kid had been smoking, and coming in the house smelling like that smoke, that nicotine smoke. But vaping, one of the benefits that they touted at the beginning is that you don't have that smell and you don't have that on you. So you mentioned coughing and some of the other things, but as a parent, I'm going, how do I know if my kid is dabbling in vaping or even addicted? Are there any signs that parents can tell, or do we have to wait until that checkup?
So it's kind of like it's important as a parent to be very direct and talk to your children. It's important to check with them regularly and ask them directly about the vaping. Even if you're sure that your kids are not vaping, you have to ask them and then talk to them about the harm of the smoking. Because what they hear from their other children or other classmates is that, oh, it's not as bad. Or they want to be part of their group, because if a group is vaping and then the other one is not, it's kind of left over. So basically, it's that parents talk to the children and regularly. The other thing is that look for symptoms. If they are like starting coughing or wheezing, or they are just acting not themselves, if they are more anxious or they seem depressed, we always check with them and check with them regularly. And then the other thing is that the parents themselves have to set a positive example with being nicotine free. And then the other thing is that parents need also education to know that how do this device look like. And like you go to your son's bedroom and you see something like USB flash drive, you have to ask them what is it, because a lot of them, they can be hide into regular places and the parents don't know. The other thing is that role of educators. School needs to talk to them. They need to advertise, and they say that these are harmful. Because the other thing that came that CDC, when they asked these children, it was that more than 75 or 76% of them were exposed to the advertising that vaping is not harmful. So we have to counterattack. We have to educate these kids, and the education is the key.
You've mentioned now a couple times the mental health aspect, which I didn't even think of until I was looking into this for our interview, and since you've been sitting here talking. Kids, I feel like, especially on this show, we talk about how kids are, and teens are more susceptible to depression and anxiety because of social media, and now this on top of it. Do you think this is a layered factor, or is it that the product within the vape will cause depression and anxiety? Is it the chemical in there, or do you think it's just rolling all into their whole, everything they're exposed to?
This is a great question, and we don't know exactly. But what we know that the kids who have ADHD or anxiety or depression are more prone to using these electronic cigarettes. And what we know that when they use, it actually can heighten their response, heighten their anxiety. But again, we need to know more about the chemicals, because unfortunately, a lot of these vape pens do not say what's inside. And is it exactly nicotine? Is it some other thing? Because it's not just the nicotine, they have flavors, which flavors are safe to eat, but not to inhale. And a lot of flavors also get their flavors from chemicals, which is not good as well. Or they may have THCs or heavy metals. So basically, end of the day, it might be a combination of the kids who are more prone or have background anxiety or depression or ADHD, and now they're exposed to the smoking and it exaggerates the symptoms.
I'm also thinking, and I don't know if this is sneaky, and I know we should develop some trust with our kids, but I think of before the annual checkup, I'll get a survey from the doctor's office saying, is there anything you want me to talk to your kid about, or any concerns or whatever? Can parents, if parents put in there, like, can you check for signs of vaping? I mean, is there anything that during that annual checkup, if given a heads up, a doctor can look and to see if there's any signs that the child's been using?
Absolutely, absolutely. But also our pediatrician have been trained or have been reminded that every time they see the child, because after age 12, usually they see the kid separate than adults. So they've been instructed to ask them about the vaping and to talk to them about the harms of vaping. And when you use, actually, when you ask about the vaping, it's not just asking that, oh, do you own a vape pen? Because they might not have it, and then use, as you said, there's a kind of trading, they get it from the friends. And also, pediatricians need to talk to them about the secondhand smoke effect of the vaping. Because sometimes your child might not vape, but they go to friends' home that everyone else is vaping, and they basically get exposed to the secondhand smoke.
Oh, wow. So addiction at that age, let's say they have been using a vape pen and now they're craving it. Is there any difference in age? Like, do younger kids get as addicted as adults, or even more addicted or less addicted? Do we know?
We don't know exactly. However, we know that the brain in this age is developing. And when they get used to something, it might stay with them. Also, data has been shown kids who start vaping when they are in their teenage age, they are more likely to continue as adults. So that the answer to your question is actually is worse when you start vaping as a young child.
Is there anything else that you think parents really need to know when it comes to this young age group and vaping?
So parents need to educate themselves. They need to know more about the smoking effect. They need to know more about vaping effect. They need to know that what this vaping come with different shapes, that they can be hide as like a regular pen or regular USB memory stick or like flash drive. And they need to be frank with their children. They need to talk to them in advance. Don't wait until it's late.
Super insightful just on all of the effects and frightening. Like I told her, I mean, it's just so scary because it's just becoming so prevalent with our kids. So for you, have you ever like looked through your kids' stuff to see if you see anything that looks like that product?
Well, I mean, first of all, for me, it was getting like familiarized with it. And I have to say, I'm not. Thankfully, my husband works in middle school. Like he's a middle school administrator, so he is always on top of these things and knowing what's going on, because it's hilarious. Back in the day when we were younger, I didn't even know what weed smelled like. Because, and I'm like, oh, what is that sweet smell? You know? So it was a joke in my household. It's like, you know, my husband would go, I gotta teach you about everything because we have these kids coming up. Because I just was in my own little world. I was an athlete and didn't really partake in that, and that wasn't my world. So it's interesting because now I like clean the house and I say, hey, you know, what is this or what is that? So no, not per se, I haven't gone looking for it because I didn't know what to look for. But I love how the doctor gives you signs to let you know of this is what you should be looking for if they have this type of, you know, paraphernalia or whatnot in their room. Yeah,
but if one of your children were coughing persistently, would you ever like first thought be, oh, have they been using
Well, now,
vaping
but before
products?
this, no. No, it would have been like, okay, let me get on the phone and call the doctor. So those are good signs to think. And I think about myself of like, how do I talk to my children about this? I mean, I really, when we had this conversation a few weeks ago, I just was listening. So because I wanted them to feel comfortable to just share instead of me going like, whoa, you know,
instead of preaching and lecturing,
and turning into investigative journalist mode, like, well, what, you know? So I really was just listening to them talk to each other and them converse, as well as then I would ask a question here or there. But I think it's interesting as we continue to have these conversations, what I want to look at is, you know, do the kids really even think long term? Like, is it helpful to say, well, do you know, in 20 years, you might be an increased risk, because kids, I feel like they don't think long term, and it's just about what happens today. So it will be interesting to me of like how to turn what the doctor is saying and be able to communicate that with, hey, you know, you may not feel the effects right now, but this is what it can happen in the future, and it's important to look at your future. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And they've been talking about how these numbers, the CDC was saying these numbers have probably dropped, that fewer high schoolers are using vaping products, probably because of Juul and some of those other companies pulling back on advertising.
Yeah, because you remember that in the news about how they were targeting kids, and it was like the fun colors and things like that. And they had got into that legal trouble for that.
But what I think of like with my kids, and my oldest is 10, but she's going to be entering middle school before I can even blink. There's so many commercials and ads out there that are, you know, talking about the effects of smoking, cigarette smoking tobacco products. We've all seen them. You see those PSAs where, you know, it shows people who have lost limbs or parts of their jaw. That has really hit a chord with my kids.
Really?
Yeah, they, yeah, almost to the point where if they see somebody smoking in public, you know when little kids say whatever they want, you know, and it's like,
help us.
Oh, my toddlers would go right up to the person smoking a cigarette and go, ah, they're smoking, gross, you know, and I'm like, you know. But I'm not seeing those type of scary ads and PSAs with vaping. So for my kids, I'm just wondering when that opportunity arises, you know, like I know we will have conversations, you're having conversations, but should there be, and this is sort of a rhetorical question, I guess, this morning, should there be more PSAs about the dangerous effects of what vaping does to you? Would that make them shy away from using these? Because right now it is a coolness factor. It is like, hey, you're cool. Like, oh, look, I've got a vape product.
Well, I think too, it's not only informing them, but informing us as parents as well. Because as just consistently on your mom squads, I think the theme is you need to be talking to your kids. You need to be investing in that relationship with your children. And so the more knowledge that we have as parents about this is why I'm so happy. Like, oh, okay, I know that you look for the USB looking thing, you know, like, wait a minute, this don't go into the computer. Right. So I think the more information we have as parents, and again, how, and sometimes that preteen, teen relationship, that's when you're like, with your kids, but you still have to keep working on it. And so we are the responsibility. We are their coaches. We are the ones who are, you know, I like to use the term discipling, mentoring them and walking with them through this time. They don't have the information, but if we do, we can really give them the tools that they need to say no.
Yeah. And, you know, I think of, my husband will always be like, well, I did stupid things when I was little. And I think we all know somebody, you know, we all have friends, if we weren't the ones, you know, using products ourselves, our spouses were, or our friends were. And so I think there's also this element of we chalk it up to like, well, that's part of growing up.
That's true.
You dabble in these things, you use these things. But when you hear about how it affects their organ development, what the doctor was saying, that was really what caught my attention. I mean, we know all of this, but when we were kids, we didn't care, you know, we didn't think about that stuff. But now as a parent, I'm thinking, gosh, they're to hinder their brain development because, you know, you're using some sort of product, that makes me want to jump in and go through and make sure I don't see any products or really have that talk with them of the long-term effects.
That's the tough part about being a parent because, you know, one of my children was in another situation, not involved with like, you know, drugs or e-cigarettes or things like that, but something else. And it was, you know, off. But me and my husband was like, we sort of felt guilty, like, can we really punish him? Because we did that when we were
younger. You feel like a hypocrite.
You know, like, I mean, we turned out fine, but it is that, but what if your kid is the one that doesn't turn out fine? So it's a hard move as a parent because, you know, I wasn't super saint or holy or just perfect. I made a lot of mistakes and did some different things, and they have to live too. But it's, you know, it's hard. It's really hard. Yes.
So do you trust, like, if they're around friends who are using some of these products, do you trust them to say, no, that's not for me? Do you think they'd do that?
I have to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that one of the things that we talk about is how you choose friends. And sometimes they make good decisions, sometimes they don't. And so I'm constantly looking at their friends. So I think for me, that's the deeper question is, who are you choosing to be friends with and why? And so, and then what is it that, if they do have friends that vape, what is it that attracts you to them? Do you get what I'm saying? Or use drugs. But from the conversations, their closest friends, they were like, yeah, they said they did it and they would never do it again. You know, just hearing the conversations. But that impact of their friend group is very important. And sometimes their friend group is much more influential on them than parents. So again, that goes back to constantly being there and trying to invest in that relationship so you don't lose that capital when it comes to who they're going to listen to in the end.
Right, exactly. And I can tell you, there were things like, I remember my friends dabbling in things, but my mom's voice was over my shoulder. And I said no, and they were still my friends afterwards.
Right,
So
right.
I'm always telling my kids about that you don't have to be doing what your friends are doing. So hopefully this gave you the tools that you need to talk to your kids about vaping, because this is an ongoing issue. Danielle, thanks again for being with me. It's so good to see you and good to be with all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Mom Squad. We'll see you back here next time.